Would you believe it if I told you that a dog managed to stop an uncontrolled car from plummeting down a slope, saving the lives of his entire family in a matter of seconds? Sounds like a movie scene, doesn't it? But this story really happened in the United States, and to this day surprises those who hear it for the first time. Imagine the scene. A car stopped on a sloping street, the family distracted around, not realizing that in moments it could be swallowed by an irreversible tragedy. And in the middle of it all, an attentive dog, staring, realizing the risk that no one else seemed to see. What you will discover now may surprise you, because this is not just another account of animal instinct. It is living proof that courage and love can manifest in the most unexpected moments. Perhaps you have heard of dogs that alert their owners to fires, that throw themselves in front of dangers, or even that guide people in risky situations. But what this dog has done is beyond any expectation. In a fraction of seconds, he noticed that the car began to slowly slide towards a steep descent, and in his heart, there was no room to hesitate. The tension grows just by imagining it. Every inch the car moved forward could spell disaster. Have you ever been through this? That feeling that something is about to go wrong, but there is still a chance, a last moment to act. For it was exactly in that fraction of an instant that the improbable happened. This episode shows more than simple instinct. It reveals a deep bond between humans and animals, a connection that goes beyond logical understanding. Not only did the dog react, he seemed to grasp the seriousness of the situation before anyone around him could even notice. And this is precisely what makes this account so striking. The keen perception, readiness and courage of an animal that, at that moment, acted as a true guardian of life. Stay with me until the end, because understanding how everything unfolded will show you why this story was forever marked in the memory of that family and everyone who knew them. Now close your eyes for a second and imagine the scene even more clearly. The car starts to move, gravity pulls hard, and despair grows among those who have not yet fully understood what is happening. The noise of tires dragging on the asphalt heralds the impending danger. The heart quickens, and time seems to run in slow motion. It is in this scenario that the unexpected is revealed. The dog, attentive and fearless, rushes towards the vehicle as if fully aware that he needed to act at that very second. Such a picture, just thinking about it, already causes goosebumps, a real portrait of animal heroism. What motivates a dog to put himself in the face of danger to save those he loves? Instinct? Love? A rare combination of the two. Experts would say there may be rational explanations, but anyone who witnesses a scene like this feels there is something much bigger involved. Perhaps that's why stories like these touch the heart so much, because they remind us that bonds of loyalty and protection can manifest at life's most critical moments, in ways that science often can't fully explain. And as you imagine all this happening, know that we are only at the beginning of this journey. With each detail revealed, the emotion grows, and the greatness of this heroic act becomes even more evident. What follows will show you not only how this dog managed to act so precisely, but also the profound impact that this attitude generated in his family and in everyone who witnessed what happened. While this scene is forming in your mind, you may also be remembering times when a pet surprised you with unexpected attitudes. It may have been a gesture of affection on a difficult day, a curious way to draw your attention to something, or even a silent protection when you least expected it. If this topic makes sense to you, leave here in the comments what touched you the most so far. Sharing your experience or impression can inspire others who also love and recognize the loyalty of animals. It is in this exchange that the story gains even more strength, because each story carries a unique emotion. And since we are building this conversation together, I want to ask you one simple but very valuable thing. Enjoy this video if it has already awakened in you any special feelings. It seems like a small gesture, but your like shows that this type of content deserves to continue being told and reaches more people who need to hear stories like this. In addition, if you feel that this message has a real value and want to follow other stories that excite, inspire and remind you how much animals are an essential part of our lives, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. Your participation here is what makes this space grow and reach more people with this type of content. And I really want you to be part of this community that believes in the power of connection between humans and animals. And while you reflect on it, we move on together because there are still details of this story that will further increase your admiration for what happened that day. The family that stars in this story seemed to live a routine like so many others. A young couple, two small children always full of energy, and a dog that was not only the pet of the house, but a real companion of life. They lived in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by neighbors who knew each other, and by streets where the movement was not intense, but where the presence of a nearby hillside always demanded attention. Between the laughter of children running in the yard and conversations on the balcony at dusk, the presence of the dog was constant, filling the environment with vitality and security. The dog, a medium-sized animal with a watchful eye and a coat that reflected sunlight, had come to the family as a puppy. It grew at the same pace as the children, becoming an inseparable part of the history of each of them. Anyone who has or has ever had a pet knows, it's not just about feeding, taking for a walk and giving affection, but about building a relationship of mutual trust. And in that house, it was visible in every detail. The dog ran after the ball thrown by the children, lay next to the sofa during family movie nights, and had the habit of always positioning himself near the door, as if he were the silent guardian of that home. Mornings almost always began with the same scene, the children waking up early, excited to play, and the dog already standing, wagging its tail, ready to take part in the daily adventure. It was as if each day was a new opportunity to strengthen the bond between them. During meals, he sat at the table watching attentively, not so much for the food itself, but because he seemed to know that this was a collective moment of unity. The relationship went far beyond simple gestures. It carried a deep meaning, almost invisible to the outside eye, but very clear to those who were part of the routine. This type of connection creates a kind of language of its own, made up of looks, movements, and even silences. The dog seemed to understand the feelings of the family, reacting to every change in tone of voice or facial expression. When someone was sad, he approached in silence, only leaning his head on his lap, as if saying without words, "I am here." When joy took over the house, he ran in circles, jumped and barked, infected by collective enthusiasm. It is in these simple gestures that the greatness of animals dwells, the ability to feel and reflect human emotions in such a pure form that it forces us to see life from another perspective. Deep down, the presence of that dog was not only a matter of companionship, but also of emotional security. Amid the challenges of moderner life, the difficult decisions every adult has to make, and the transformations that time brings, there was always the certainty that he would be there, offering silent support. It is interesting to think how often we seek great hidden truths, complex answers to the meaning of life, and forget that small demonstrations of love and loyalty already carry immense depth. This family, even without consciously realizing it, had in their daily lives a constant reminder of what really matters: genuine connection. On weekends, the scenes came to life even more. Children invented games that mixed imagination and energy, and the dog participated as a central character, either as a hero in the invented adventures, or as the faithful squire who never left his companions alone. The couple, in turn, watched with a mixture of joy and gratitude. After all, there was no greater gift than to see children growing up surrounded by love, learning values of care and responsibility from an early age, precisely through the relationship with that animal. And like every true Bond story, the behind the scenes of this coexistence revealed even more. There were days when the rush of the routine left everyone exhausted, but there he was, the dog, remembering that even in the midst of the rush, it was necessary to stop a little, breathe, play. This presence functioned almost as a daily invitation to balance the mentality, to value the small moments that so often go unnoticed. It's as if that dog has the power to stop time, to bring everyone back to the present. It is at this point that we understand how bonds are built, not in a specific moment, but in a continuous journey, made of details, of repetitions, of small daily choices. Trust is not born all at once, but from every gesture of care, from every night when the dog remained alert, from every morning when he woke up with his family, and it was precisely this solid relationship, woven over the years, that would prove decisive at the moment when danger knocked on the door. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because understanding the strength of this bond is essential to understanding why what happened next was so extraordinary. Instinct does not arise out of nowhere. It is fed by experiences, by constant perceptions, by a type of intelligence that mixes emotion and survival. This dog not only lived in that house, he absorbed all the signals, all the movements, all the energy of the family. It was as if he had developed the ability to anticipate situations, to prepare without anyone noticing. This keen perception often goes unnoticed by humans, but it is present all the time. At every noise in the street, at every strange gesture of someone approaching the gate, the dog was attentive, ready to act. This behavior, which to many seemed only natural instinct, hid a hidden truth. He was always in a state of vigilance, always ready to intervene when necessary. And perhaps that is what is most striking about this story, to realize that heroism does not arise by chance, but is the consequence of a bond cultivated day after day. And here is an important point. When we talk about transformation, we mean not only grandiose changes or sudden revelations, but also this ability to recognize greatness in the simple. The family in its ordinary days perhaps was not fully aware of how much it was being shaped by that coexistence. Children learned about loyalty and courage, adults reinforced in themselves the importance of caring and protecting, and the dog quietly absorbed every detail, preparing for the moment when he would need to show how far his devotion went. And it is in this balance between everyday and unexpected that this narrative finds its strength. The seemingly ordinary routine became the foundation of a heroic act that would change everything. The impact of this type of experience is profound, because it forces us to reflect on the very decisions we make in our daily lives. How often do we ignore the signs, fail to pay attention to details, and miss opportunities to act at the right time? Perhaps this is one of the great lessons hidden in this story, the importance of being present, of developing a watchful eye, of cultivating a mentality that values the signs before it is too late. And as we continue on this dive, it's evident that this isn't just about a dog and his family, but a universal reminder about courage, connection, and responsibility. The act that would follow was not the fruit of chance, but rather the direct result of this silent journey of love and trust. Life often teaches us by the edges, showing that even the simplest backstage holds profound revelations. And it is precisely this background that sets the stage for what was about to happen, a moment in which everything that seemed only routine turned out to be the basis for an action that would defy logic. He said, "That makes sense to me." Everything seemed to follow the quiet rhythm of an afternoon. The family was gathered, talking and laughing, not imagining that in a matter of seconds reality would change abruptly. The car was parked in front of the house on a street that, although it seemed harmless, hid a dangerous detail, a long slope which ended at a busy intersection. Those who look from the outside may not immediately realize the risk, but it is enough to imagine the weight of a vehicle sliding out of control to understand the gravity. What was about to happen did not give clear signs, did not carry an audible warning, but carried in itself a potential for tragedy that could forever mark the life of that family. While the children were playing and the parents were talking nearby, the car, silent, made its first movement almost imperceptibly, a slight displacement, as if pushed by a stronger breeze. Only it was not wind, it was not chance. The poorly adjusted brake, or perhaps a momentary carelessness, caused gravity to begin to act. That inclination that had always been there, unobtrusive, now turned into a real threat. It's amazing how in situations like this, every detail gains another proportion. The faint creak of tires sounded like a muffled cry of warning, a sound that few would notice but which, to those who were attentive, carried an urgent message. The first seconds of movement drew almost no attention. It was as if the car had just given way in the space in which it was parked. But the hidden truth is that physics is unforgiving. A vehicle on an incline does not stop on its own. It gains speed with every centimeter, and every missed instant increases the potential impact in a frightening way. This is where the suspense grows, because it is enough to imagine the children nearby, distracted, not understanding what was happening. That simple slide could, in a few meters, turn into a scene of destruction. The human mind, faced with risky situations, usually takes a few seconds to react. It is as if there is a barrier between perception and action. How many times have you found yourself in a moment of surprise, paralyzed for an instant, trying to process what was in fact happening? That's the difference between watching something and acting immediately. And on that day, as the car began to gain momentum, This mental retardation was exactly what could cost dearly. The impending danger grew quietly, and the family, without realizing it, was vulnerable. The impact of viewing this scene is enormous because it reveals an uncomfortable truth. We are always one step away from situations that are beyond our control. Life is made up of decisions, but there are times when there is no time to calmly decide. It is in improvisation, in instinct, that the course of things is defined. This moving car posed more than a physical risk. It also represented a reminder of how life's journey can change in seconds without warning. And perhaps that's precisely why stories like this touch us so much, because they have opened up how exposed we are to the unexpected. Every inch traveled by the car intensified the suspense. The gaze of a more distant neighbor might begin to catch on, but the proximity of the family made it difficult to see the obvious. After all, who imagines that a vehicle stopped at the door of the house will suddenly turn into a threat? It is in this contrast between normality and risk that the emotional shock of this narrative lies. Everyday life shatters in seconds, revealing scenes that could have gone unnoticed forever. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what's at stake here is not just a sliding car, but the revelation of how small details can have an immense impact. A poorly pulled handbrake, a seemingly insignificant oversight, or even an excessive reliance on routine. How many times have you blindly trusted that something was safe just because it always was? This mentality is common but also dangerous. The truth is that many of the risks we face come not from major external threats, but from minimal breaches within what we believe we have mastered. And this episode clearly shows how the sum of small factors creates a gigantic transformation in the course of things. The sloping street has always been there, the car has always been used without major problems, the family has always lived that routine without worrying. But at that moment, fate decided to reveal the fragility hidden behind the scenes. What might have seemed just another ordinary afternoon was about to become a tension-laden memory, and every second that passed increased the feeling that the outcome could be irreversible. The suspense grows because, as the car moved forward, there was no one, at that exact moment, who was ready to react. The minds of the adults were still immersed in the conversation, the laughter of the children occupied the air, and the perception of danger was slow to emerge. This interval of awareness is short, but sufficient for the threat to amplify. The vehicle was no longer just sliding, it was taking on the force of the descent, multiplying its weight, turning into an uncontrolled machine that could hit anything ahead. It is at this point that the importance of the unexpected is understood. Life puts us in situations where there is no manual, no formal preparation, only the chance to respond at the exact moment when everything happens. The moving car was not only a mechanical hazard, but also a powerful metaphor for how circumstances test us without asking for permission. And there, on that seemingly quiet street, the family was seconds away from witnessing a dramatic turnaround. My heart is racing just imagining it. The sounds of the environment blend in. The loudest squeak of tires, continuous sliding, the belated realization that something was not right. The children, in the midst of their play, looked on without understanding. The couple began to turn their attention to the car, but still did not understand the extent of what was about to happen. Danger did not announce its arrival with fanfare, but imposed itself on every detail of the scenario. And meanwhile, the slope ahead seemed to call the car to the bottom of the abyss, a dangerous invitation of gravity that could not be stopped easily. This moment is like a clip from life, showing that the difference between relief and tragedy can be in seconds. It is also a reminder that often the signs are there, but our mentality, stuck in the flow of routine, does not allow us to see them clearly. This uncomfortable revelation is what gives the story even more strength, because it puts us in front of an inevitable question. What would you do if you were in the place of this family? He says, "I'm on this journey too." At that moment when the car began to gain speed on the descent, the family's eyes were still stuck on the normality of the scene. But there was one look that didn't let itself be fooled. The dog, who until then seemed just another spectator of the quiet afternoon, reacted even before any adult realized the real danger. It was as if an invisible thread of instinct had ignited within him, awakening something that went beyond logic and routine. While the human mind needed a few seconds to process the situation, the dog didn't hesitate. He just knew. His attentive ears caught the muffled creak of tires against the asphalt, a sound that could go unnoticed by anyone distracted. His body stiffened, and in a single movement the senses went into high alert. His eyes locked on the car, his breathing quickened, and his posture changed in the blink of an eye. It is striking how in moments of risk, the nature of animals reveals a hidden truth that we often forget. They do not live trapped in the excess of thoughts, the weight of decisions, or the mental retardation that we carry. They act on the basis of something pure, direct, which is born from the connection between perception and action. The dog seemed to understand that this displacement was not normal. It was not an ordinary noise, nor an expected movement. Something inside him screamed that there was danger. And in that silent cry, time seemed to dilate. While the adults still looked on without understanding, and the children continued immersed in their games, the dog was already ready for the transformation of that instant. His mindset was not calculation or analysis, but a visceral certainty. There was a threat and he needed to do something. It is curious to think how the backstage of life prepares us without us realizing it. For years, this dog observed every detail of the family's routine. The way the car parked, the noises that indicated safety or failure, the gestures of attention of the owners. All this was accumulating like a kind of silent database inside him, and at that moment, all this knowledge condensed into a single impulse. There was no room for doubt. It was either act or watch the inevitable fall. This readiness was not born out of nowhere. It was shaped in daily coexistence, in the constant look that the dog cast on the life around. He knew how to distinguish the footsteps of the family at the gate, the characteristic sounds of each door closing, the noise of the car when the handbrake was pulled correctly and when it was not. This perception, which could seem like detail to any of us, for him was code of survival. He not only lived in that house, he studied it quietly. And that's why at the exact moment the vehicle began to give way, he noticed. It is at this point that the narrative becomes even more fascinating. The dog did not need to reflect on accident statistics, did not need to calculate speed or angle of the slope. What moved his reaction was something that we humans call instinct, but which in practice is a reflection of mindfulness. He was present, body and soul, no distractions, no mental noises, and it was precisely this clarity that allowed him to act before everyone else. Think for a moment. How many times have you missed an important detail because you were too busy with parallel thoughts? How many times have you ignored a subtle signal, trusting that nothing wrong would happen? The dog does not allow himself this luxury. For him, every detail matters, and in that instant, every fiber of his being focused on the abnormal movement of the car. The whole body reacted like a perfect cog, ears erect, muscles tense, heart racing, paws steady on the ground. The gaze fixed on the vehicle conveyed more than attention. It conveyed decision. It was as if he had taken responsibility for being the first to understand what was happening. This early perception, this immediate reading of risk, is what differentiates the ordinary animal from a hero. It wasn't just about survival instinct, but something bigger, a deep bond with those he considered his family. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because the perception of risk is not just a curious detail, it is a reflection of how the connection between living beings can surpass any rational explanation. When we talk about impact, we are not just describing the danger of the car, but the shock of consciousness that this moment awakens in us. The dog, when perceiving the risk, reminds us of something essential, that often our safety depends on what is beyond our conscious control, on what seems invisible, but which acts forcefully behind the scenes of life. This moment also leads us to reflect on mentality and choices. The family, immersed in the flow of everyday life, was slow to realize the danger because it was trapped in the comfort of, "It's always been like this." The dog, on the contrary, showed that true alertness is born from mindfulness. This difference in perception is what marks the fine line between normalcy and tragedy. And it is here that we begin to understand the weight of the journey that was about to unfold. What is most striking is to note how this animal consciousness reveals a transformation in the way we understand the world. We are used to thinking that intelligence is always connected with reason, with calculations, with logical decisions. But in this case, intelligence manifested itself in the form of instinct, and this does not diminish its value. On the contrary, it enlarges. It shows that there are hidden revelations in forms of knowledge that we underestimate. The dog, with its keen perception, demonstrated that the hidden truth is often not in grand reasoning, but in the ability to feel and act immediately. As the car sped towards danger, the dog had already crossed the line between observer and protagonist. The suspense was not only in the movement of the vehicle, but also in the invisible decision that had just been made. And it is at this point that the narrative intensifies, because we know that something great was about to happen. And it all started with this sharp perception, with this instant in which only one being was able to see the risk before everyone else. This scene carries with it a powerful lesson. Being mindful is an act of love. The dog did not expect rewards, did not make calculations about what would happen if he acted. He just understood that he needed to protect. And this readiness, this state of constant wakefulness, is what makes us reflect on how life can change in seconds, how transformation can be born from something seemingly small. This is the moment when we understand that the hero already revealed himself, even before the physical action, because true heroism begins within, in the silent decision not to ignore the signs. Perception was the first step, and perhaps the most important. Without it, there would be no reaction, there would be no salvation. He said, "That makes sense to me." The car was no longer just a parked object. He had become a real threat, sliding with the weight of gravity, every inch gaining speed, every fraction of a second increasing the danger. The dog, who had already realized the risk before everyone else, now launched into motion. There was no room for doubt, no hesitation. His paws touched the ground hard, each thrust charged with the urgency of one who knew there was no time to lose. His eyes were fixed on the vehicle, and his entire body seemed to respond to a single invisible command: act. The air seemed to compress around it, as if time had slowed down. The family was still beginning to understand what was happening, their eyes slowly turning to the moving car. But the dog was already on the run. The sound of his nails scraping against the ground mingled with the increasingly intense grinding of tires. What could have been just seconds of distraction now turned into a scene of absolute suspense. It was as if every detail was a domino piece about to fall apart in a chain. The scene was a portrait of courage. The dog advanced against the inevitable, not caring about the logic of the impossible. Many would say that an animal would have no ability to interfere with the course of a moving vehicle. But at that moment, the rules didn't seem to matter. What guided his steps was an instinct stronger than reason, a determination shaped by his unconditional love for his family. He did not think about danger, did not calculate risks. "I just knew I needed to try." When he reached the car, the tension reached its peak. The vehicle was already gaining speed. The sound of creaking metal made it clear that the descent would not forgive. The dog jumped against the half-open door, its front paws supporting each other tightly. It was as if every muscle was being strained to the maximum. The handbrake was there, loose, waiting only for a firm touch to completely change the fate of that scene. And in that instant, the impossible began to become real. The image is almost cinematic. The dog pulling with its paws, its teeth trying to firm support, fighting the force of a car that insisted on descending. With every second, the slope became steeper, the risk more imminent, and the chance of avoiding disaster narrower. But the animal did not give up. The panting, the tense muscles, the determined gaze, everything indicated that he had placed himself in that battle as the absolute protagonist. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because what is at stake here goes beyond the scene itself. This heroic act cannot be reduced only to an instinctive reaction. It carries with it a message of transformation. The mindset that governs a dog's action in moments of crisis teaches us about immediate decisions that we humans often let slip. The dog did not wait for someone to shout, did not wait for a command. He saw the risk and acted. And it is this readiness that makes the difference between a disaster and a breath of relief. Behind the scenes of life, we are constantly tested. Small signs appear, asking for our attention. But how many times do we leave it for later? How many times do we prefer to believe that nothing serious is going to happen? This episode reveals a hidden truth. The biggest impacts don't come from long planning, but from the courage to act at the very moment something needs to be done. The dog, without understanding logic or probabilities, shows us that, in the face of danger, the decision to try is more valuable than the guarantee of success. The car lurched, as if resisting interference. For a second, it seemed that the dog's effort would be in vain. But it was at that moment that strength added to determination. The handbrake gave way, being pulled firmly by the paws. The metallic sound echoed like a shout of victory. The car braked sharply, its tires braking against the asphalt, leaving rubber marks that betrayed how close to the abyss everyone had come. The silence that followed was almost deafening. It was as if the world had held its breath along with the family. It took the adults a few moments to process what had happened, eyes wide, hearts racing. The children, who had previously laughed nonchalantly, now looked on in shock, not fully understanding the extent of what had been avoided. But the dog, still panting, stood firm as if he had fulfilled exactly what he needed to do. This scene carries a huge emotional weight because it shows how much life can change in seconds. An instant before, there was only routine, conversation, and banter. An instant later, there was the imminent risk of tragedy. And between these two extremes, there was the heroic action of an animal that did not hesitate. The impact of this is not limited to the physical safety of the family, but extends to the field of consciousness. It is impossible to watch such an act and not reflect on the importance of presence, attention, and courage in our own journeys. When we think of heroes, we often imagine grandiose feats performed by trained people, endowed with special abilities. But the truth is that heroism also reveals itself behind the scenes of ordinary life. He appears in the form of a dog that runs into a runaway car, which throws itself at the improbable, only because it knows that it cannot stand still. This revelation is powerful because it forces us to rethink what we mean by courage. It is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act even when everything seems to say otherwise. And perhaps that is what is most striking about this story, the contrast between uncontrollable risk and unexpected action. The car had everything to go on its inevitable course, but it was stopped by someone who, in the eyes of the world, would not have the slightest chance of winning this battle. This shows us that we often underestimate the strength that can come from where we least expect it. The unexpected can alter entire destinies. As the car lay motionless, relief began to spread through the environment. But the family's heart was still beating fast. The emotions jumbled between fright and gratitude. The hidden truth of that instant is that everyone was alive thanks to the silent decision of a dog who chose not to ignore the signs. And this kind of revelation marks us forever, because it reinforces how much our own decisions can have a profound impact not only on our lives, but on the lives of those who depend on us. The dog's act was not only physical, it was symbolic. It reminds us that in the face of a threat, waiting can be the worst choice. Life is made up of journeys where we suddenly need to take on a role we never thought we'd play, and that is exactly what transforms us. It's not about winning every time, but being willing to try. The dog tried, and his act changed the fate of a whole family. And so the scene closes not with the sound of tragedy, but with the echo of the panting breath of an unlikely hero. And even if the immediate danger was contained, the impact of that action would continue to reverberate far beyond that day, shaping memories, reflections, and even the way that family would see the value of life from then on. He says, "I'm on this journey too." The dry sound of tires braking against the asphalt echoed like a crack in everyone's heart. That abrupt noise, which in other contexts could only be bothersome, at that instant sounded like the soundtrack of survival. The family, who seconds earlier were still trying to understand what was happening, finally woke up to the seriousness of the situation. The father's gaze was the first to fix on the car, which remained motionless after the start. And only then did he realize how close everyone had come to an irreversible tragedy. The body reacted with a mixture of trembling and relief, as if the mind was still struggling to process that the worst had been avoided. The mother, in turn, instinctively rushed towards the children, pulling them closer to herself. The embrace was tight, almost suffocating, but it carried in itself the need to feel that they were whole, that nothing had happened. Her eyes filled with tears, not just from the fright, but from the sudden realization that in a matter of seconds, life could have taken a completely different turn. It is in these moments that consciousness expands and puts us before the hidden truth, the fragility of routine. What seems secure and constant can fall apart in the blink of an eye, and all that remains is the gratitude of still being able to breathe. The children, who until then had not understood the gravity of the scene, now looked on in silence. Their faces, once lit up with laughter, were taken by a seriousness unusual for such young ages. The gaze fixed on the dog made it clear that even without understanding all the details, they realized that something extraordinary had just happened. The dog, still panting, stood beside the car as if it were the guardian who had won a battle. The quickened breathing, the chest rising and falling in intense rhythm, contrasted with the serenity of the eyes that, in an almost human way, seemed to say, "You are safe now." The father approached slowly, as if each step was a confirmation that yes, the danger had passed. The trembling hand leaned on the hood of the car, still warm, and he let out a long, heavy sigh, as if exhaling all the fear accumulated in a few seconds. Looking at the dog, he could not contain the mixture of surprise and admiration. There was something there that defied logic. How could an animal have done that? How had he perceived the risk before everyone else? The man's heart was filled with a silent, almost reverential recognition. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this instant is not just about an accident avoided. It's about emotional impact, about inner transformation, about how one sudden event can forever change the mindset of an entire family. Each of them at that moment began to see the dog not only as a companion, but as a being capable of heroic decisions. The hidden truth that emerged was that love and protection have no fixed boundaries. They can come in the most unexpected ways, even from where many do not expect. The mother, still hugging the children, let the tears flow without resistance. They were not tears of pain, but of relief and gratitude. In his heart, the revelation was clear. That dog wasn't just part of the family. He was a vital link, someone who was willing to put his own body between them and tragedy. This insight transformed the bond immediately. What used to be affection now became reverence, a kind of deep recognition that they were facing something greater than simple coexistence. The children, still silent, slowly approached the dog. One of them reached out a trembling hand, touching the coat damp from the effort. The dog in response only wagged its tail subtly, without energy for jumping or playing, but with a look that conveyed security. This gesture, simple and powerful, was enough to consolidate in the child's heart a memory that would never be erased. The memory of that moment would become a mark for life's entire journey, a symbol that courage can come from where you least expect it. The emotional impact of that moment reverberated in invisible waves. The father felt the weight of the decisions he did not make in time, realizing how slow he had been to react. But instead of letting himself be overcome by guilt, what bubbled up inside him was admiration. I admired the dog for seeing what he didn't see. I admired his speed, his courage, and his delivery. This contrast between human hesitation and animal readiness was an uncomfortable and at the same time inspiring revelation. It showed that answers are often closer to instinct than to excessive logic. It is interesting to note how, behind the scenes of life, these moments of shock carry with them profound lessons. The family would never look at their daily lives in the same way again. There was an inevitable transformation underway. The car stuck on the descent was not just a stationary vehicle. It was the physical reminder of a fate that almost happened. And next to him, an exhausted but victorious dog represented the symbol of an invisible choice that had changed everything. This reaction of the family, marked by relief and surprise, also opened space for a new perception of responsibility. The father and mother looked at each other, still speechless, but with the awareness that future decisions could not be made on the automatic. There was a hidden truth there. Relying only on routine is dangerous. Small oversights can have immense impacts. And as much as they were saved that day by the instinct of a dog, they knew that life would require different attention from them henceforth. The silence that followed was not empty, it was loaded with meaning. The noise of children playing no longer filled the space. What reigned now was a kind of reverence. It was as if everyone was silently digesting the magnitude of what had just happened. Each in their own way felt the same thing: deep gratitude. And this gratitude spread like an invisible energy, further connecting the bond between them and that animal that until minutes before seemed only part of the routine, but that now showed itself as a true hero. Mom was the first to break the silence. His choked voice, soft and charged with emotion, uttered simple words that echoed in everyone's heart. He saved us. And in that instant, as if the statement had shaped what everyone felt, the whole family approached the dog, hugging him, stroking his head, crying and smiling at the same time. The dog, tired, just let himself be involved, accepting that moment of recognition. This collective gesture was not just an instinctive reaction of relief. It was a spontaneous ceremony of thanks. It was the human heart responding to animal courage. It was the confirmation that, in a journey of life, one does not have to speak the same language to understand the greatness of a gesture. The impact of this collective embrace would be eternal, not only for them, but also as a story to be told, repeated and remembered whenever someone questioned the depth of the bond between humans and animals. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because it is not just a moment of danger overcome, but a revelation about what it means to trust, love, and recognize. When the family pulled away from the car and hugged the dog, they weren't just celebrating survival, they were sealing an invisible pact of respect. From then on, every look at that animal would carry the memory of its courage. Each gesture of affection would have a greater weight. Each word addressed to him would come loaded with the memory that, in a critical instant, it was he who kept everyone on their feet. And this is the kind of experience that marks a profound transformation. It not only changes the perception of the present, but shapes future decisions. The family, now aware of the fragility of routine, would live each day with a renewed look. And the dog, once seen only as a symbolic guardian, was now recognized as a real guardian, one who had crossed the line between instinct and heroism. He said, "That makes sense to me." The silence that engulfed the street seemed to weigh more heavily than any noise. It was as if even the wind had stopped for a few seconds to contemplate what had just happened. The car was locked there, with the wheels marking the asphalt, denouncing the violence of a movement that only did not turn into tragedy because of the unlikely intervention of that dog. Just a few more meters of descent, and everyone would have witnessed the vehicle plummet down the slope, dragging with it the risk of collisions, destruction, and injuries that could have changed the life of that family forever. This sight was frightening, and perhaps that is why the heart of each of them beat so hard, as if it wanted to remind at every moment that they were still alive. The father, after catching some of his breath, walked a few steps ahead, coming close to the edge of the slope. The sight from there was a brutal reminder of how close they came to disaster. The narrow street, the steep incline, the busy intersection just below, it was the perfect setting for a serious accident. A simple mental calculation showed the impact the car would have caused if it had slid a few more seconds. He stood still, silent, looking down, feeling the invisible weight of a tragedy that did not happen, but that left marks as if it had been real. The mother approached slowly, still with her hands firmly on the children's shoulders, as if she could not let go of them. She also looked at the descent, and her eyes again filled with tears. They were no longer tears of fright, but of understanding. The revelation was clear. Their lives had been saved at the last moment. For a split second, that could have changed absolutely everything. The human mind, realizing this kind of proximity to danger, often creates an emotional echo that lasts for a long time. It is as if the heart keeps revisiting that fine line between life and tragedy, remembering without ceasing how fragile everything is. The dog, still panting, remained motionless next to the car. His body showed exhaustion, but his eyes conveyed an impressive serenity. It was as if he knew that he had fulfilled his role, that he had been in the right place at the right time. For the family, looking at him at that moment was like facing a mystery. How had that animal figured it out before everyone else? How had he acted so precisely, almost as if he understood the gravity of the situation? There was no logical explanation that satisfied their hearts, and perhaps that was why the feeling was all the more intense. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this instant of almost tragedy makes us reflect on how life is marked by decisive moments. Sometimes we spend years in a seemingly stable routine, believing that we control what happens around us. But then an episode emerges that reveals the hidden truth. Our journey is full of turning points, and their impact may be irreversible. The car almost plummeting from that slope was not just an isolated eve. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this instant of almost tragedy makes us reflect on how life is marked by decisive moments. Sometimes we spend years in a seemingly stable routine, believing that we control what happens around us. But then an episode emerges that reveals the hidden truth. Our journey is full of turning points, and their impact may be irreversible. The car almost plummeting from that slope was not just an isolated event. It was a metaphor for human frailty, the need to be vigilant and how quick decisions or actions can alter destiny. The father, still facing the slope, felt a mixture of fear and gratitude. Fear for what might have happened, and gratitude that it didn't. It is curious how, at such moments, the human mind begins to revisit all recent decisions, trying to find a reason, an explanation, something that justifies what happened. But often there are no clear answers. It only remains to accept that life is also made up of invisible back. The father, still facing the slope, felt a mixture of fear and gratitude. Fear for what might have happened, and gratitude that it didn't. It is curious how, at such moments, the human mind begins to revisit all recent decisions, trying to find a reason, an explanation, something that justifies what happened. But often there are no clear answers. It only remains to accept that life is also made up of invisible backstage, of forces that align in an inexplicable way, and of instants in which everything is decided in a breath of time. The children, still hugging their mother, watched the scene in silence. His innocent eyes caught only part of what had happened, but the emotion was there, etched in his serious expressions. Deep down, even without fully understanding, they knew that something huge had been avoided. And it is precisely in these moments that memories are formed, those that remain forever in the mind and heart, shaping the way we see life. For them, that dog would never again be just a playmate. He now carried the image of a protector, someone who had prevented a happy day from turning into a traumatic memory. The sound of the wind blowing again brought everyone back to the present, but it was impossible to ignore the feeling that they had crossed a threshold. The car, still parked a few meters from the edge, was physical proof of how close they came to the tragedy. One had only to look at those marks on the ground to understand that the difference between life and death, between routine and catastrophe, was measured. The sound of the wind blowing again brought everyone back to the present. But it was impossible to ignore the feeling that they had crossed a threshold. The car, still parked a few meters from the edge, was physical proof of how close they came to the tragedy. One had only to look at those marks on the ground to understand that the difference between life and death, between routine, the father, as he turned to look at the dog, felt something he might never have felt before: genuine reverence. It wasn't just gratitude, it was the realization that that animal had shown a courage that many human beings would not have shown. The mother, wiping away her tears, also understood that from then on the relationship with the dog would never be the same. He had ceased to be just part of the family, to become a symbol of protection, instinct, and unconditional love. This kind of experience shows us how entire journeys can be transformed in a matter of seconds. The suspense that hung over that street wouldn't go away anytime soon. Every time they looked down the hill, the family would be reminded of what almost happened. Every time they saw the car parked, they would feel a chill on their spine. But along with that chill would also come the memory of the hero who acted when no one else noticed. And perhaps this is the most important revelation. Life does not give us clear warnings. It puts us in front of choices and dangers with no time to think, and it is at that very moment that the difference is made. The dog had no doubts, had no hesitation, and that readiness was what wrote the ending of that scene, preventing it from being tragic. He said, "That makes sense to me." The heavy silence that had engulfed the street slowly began to dissolve, replaced by a wave of relief that seemed almost palpable. The car was stationary, safe, and although the tire tracks still gave away how much everything had been by a thread, the feeling at that moment was of victory. The family, still with racing hearts and trembling hands, was approaching the dog as if they were facing a living miracle. The father, still not believing what had just happened, knelt before him and ran his hand down his warm back, feeling every panting breath, every quickening beat of that heart that minutes before had made all the difference. The children ran, now freed from the initial shock, and threw themselves on the animal, hugging it as if they wanted to never let it go again. The dog's tail wagged slowly, as if silently saying that everything was fine, that the danger had passed. The weight of the moment was so intense that no one could express it in words. It was as if all the emotions were mixed, the fright still fresh, the joy of being alive, and the immense gratitude for that being who, without measuring consequences, had protected everyone. The mother knelt down next to the dog, her hands stroking its muzzle and dizzy eyes fixed on it. She whispered something softly, maybe a thank you, maybe just a sound choked with emotion, but enough to convey what was in her heart. This moment was more than a simple gesture of affection. It was a bow. It was the full awareness that if it wasn't for the dog, maybe they wouldn't be there, together, hugged and whole. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, Because what is revealed here is not just an isolated heroic act, but the strength of a bond built day after day behind the scenes of a seemingly ordinary routine. The gratitude that the family felt at that moment did not come out of nowhere. It was the result of years of living together, of small moments in which the dog had already shown its loyalty in more subtle ways. Only that day, that loyalty had turned into concrete action, into real impact. It's amazing how life offers us these revelations when we least expect them. We often run after great deeds, after grandiose transformations, but we forget that the greatest miracles are in simple gestures, made at the very moment when they are needed. The dog did not need applause, did not think about recognition, just did what his heart and instinct commanded. And it is precisely this dispossession, this total surrender without expecting anything in return, that makes his attitude even more powerful. The family, now relieved, were overcome by a mixture of nervous laughter and tears. The children spoke at the same time, trying to describe what they had seen, while the father still stared at the dog, as if trying to forever engrave that image in his memory. The impact was so profound that they knew deep down that that episode would become a story repeated countless times, not just among themselves but with friends, neighbors, perhaps even strangers, because certain experiences carry with them the need to be told, as if the simple narrative were capable of transmitting part of the emotion experienced. The dog, in turn, seemed indifferent to the full weight of what he had done. He took a deep breath, lay down on the floor for a moment, but his eyes did not lose their connection with those of the family. That look was the invisible bridge that held the bond between them, and if there had been any doubt before, it was now clear. This was not just a pet, it was an essential part of the family, a link that had become even stronger and indestructible. The father, in a spontaneous gesture, raised the dog in his arms. The weight of the animal seemed light before the immensity of gratitude it carried. The children clapped their hands, laughed, cried, and the mother, seeing the scene, smiled through tears. That collective hug, wrapping everyone around the dog, was almost ceremonial. There was no rehearsal, no preparation, but it was as if life had decided to create there a moment of celebration, a consecration of love and recognition. And this is the hidden truth we so often ignore. Love, when put into action, transforms the perception of who we are. That dog not only prevented an accident, he redefined the place he occupied in the heart of the family. If before he was a comrade, now he was a hero. If before it was presence, now it was symbol. This kind of transformation does not fade, does not dissolve over time. On the contrary, it intensifies with each memory, with each look exchanged, with each instant in which the memory of that day resurfaced. The relief that spread through the air was not only physical, it was also spiritual. All of them somehow felt that they had been given a second chance, a renewed opportunity to continue the journey together. And the recognition of this gift made the bond even more precious. Life, which moments before seemed about to be torn apart, now turned out to be a gift. And that contrast between risk and salvation is what makes gratitude so intense, so true. Neighbors, who started to approach after hearing the noise, stopped at the scene. They saw the car stopped, the family hugging and the dog at the center of everything. It was impossible not to notice that something extraordinary had happened, and this external look, coming from those who witnessed only the remnants of the episode, further reinforced the grandiosity of the moment. Because when courage is so evident, it doesn't need words to be recognized. That moment of intimate celebration of the family became, at the same time, a collective milestone, a story that would gain voice in conversations, memories, and learning. Because certain experiences carry the power to transcend the limits of the house in which they take place. They become universal narratives, capable of touching anyone who listens to them, precisely because they speak of values that everyone understands: love, protection, loyalty. And the most beautiful thing about it is realizing how this scene of a panting dog being hugged by his family is both unique and universal. Unique because it happened that day, on that street, with those people. But universal because it could happen anywhere, with any family that had the privilege of living this kind of connection with their animal. This is the kind of revelation that transcends boundaries, that speaks directly to the human heart. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because what is drawn here is not only the outcome of a moment of danger, but the beginning of a new phase in the life of that family. The bond, which was already strong, was now consolidated on a much deeper level. Every future gesture, every exchanged look, every play with the dog would have as a background the memory that he had been the guardian that day. And this awareness not only strengthens bonds, but transforms mentalities. It shows that quick decisions, driven by love, have the power to change destinies. This is the real impact of relief and gratitude. They are not limited to the instant in which they are experienced, but they are prolonged, shaping the journey that comes after. From then on, that family would never be the same. And the dog, silent and loyal, had become the symbol of this transformation. He says, "I'm on this journey too." While the family was still hugging the dog, amid tears and nervous laughter, the sounds of the neighborhood began to fill the environment again. Doors opened, windows flew open, hurried footsteps echoed along the sidewalk. The noise of the tires braking and the intense drive had attracted attention. A neighbor, the first to approach, walked with an expression of amazement. His gaze went from the car standing on the edge of the slope to the panting dog surrounded by the family. He did not need elaborate explanations to understand that he had witnessed something unusual. "I saw it from up here," he said, his voice choked with disbelief. "That dog saved you." The phrase sounded like a stamp of reality, as if it gave voice to what everyone already knew but had not yet managed to articulate. That statement, simple and straightforward, had the power to turn what could only be interpreted as luck into a public acknowledgement of heroism. The father looked at the neighbor, still in shock, and nodded his head, unable to find words. The mother held the children tightly, while the little ones, now attentive to the lines, began to realize that what they had experienced was not just scary, but extraordinary. Other residents approached, forming a small circle around the scene. There were murmurs, exclamations of surprise, and even discreet tears on some faces. Each witness brought with them a different view. Some had seen only the moving car, others had noticed the dog jump against the door, and some had heard only the final noise. But all shared the same certainty. Without the intervention of that animal, the outcome would have been tragic. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter because such external recognition carries a special force. When only those involved realize the seriousness of a situation, the impact can be restricted to the family's internal memory. But when witnesses validate and highlight what happened, the episode gains another dimension. It ceases to be just an intimate memory and becomes a collective narrative, a story with authority. The hidden truth that emerges is that heroism, when recognized by others, takes on symbolic weight. And that weight shapes not only the family's relationship with the dog, but how everyone around them comes to see the strength of the invisible bonds between humans and animals. An older neighbor, who carried years of experience and wisdom in his posture, approached and said in a firm voice, "I have seen a lot in this life, but I have never witnessed anything like it. This dog deserves to be remembered by all of us." These words, coming from someone respected in the community, echoed strongly in the heart of the family. It was as if the authority of that neighbor conferred a seal of truth, eliminating any possibility of doubt. The dog was not only a hero to them, but now also to the whole neighborhood. This collective validation amplified the emotion even more, because it showed that the impact of the gesture had gone beyond the limits of the backyard and spread through the streets, through the looks, through the conversations that would inevitably take place in the following days. The children, listening to the comments, tightened their arms around the dog even more, as if they wanted to protect it from excessive attention. But at the same time, his eyes shone with pride. It was confirmation that the playmate had become a symbol of courage. The father and mother, still emotional, allowed the neighbors to approach, some stroking the dog, others just watching in respectful silence. Each gesture reinforced the grandeur of what had happened. This public recognition also brought an immediate reflection. If so many people were impressed, it was because there really was something extraordinary. This was not an exaggeration of the familiar emotion, but an undeniable fact. The car almost crashed, and the dog was the one who changed the course of events. This perception further fueled gratitude, but also pride. Proud to live with someone, even if they weren't human, capable of acting with such bravery. It's interesting to note how behind the scenes in life, The gaze of others can shape the way we see our own experiences. The family already felt the greatness of the moment, but it was when listening to the words of the witnesses that the meaning took on even clearer outlines. This is something that also happens in our personal journeys. We often need the external look to understand the real dimension of our own experiences. The mother, still emotional, smiled through tears when she heard a neighbor say, "You have a real four-legged angel at home." The expression four-legged angel spread like fire on dry straw. Some repeated, others nodded their heads. It was as if that phrase had given a name to what everyone felt. And from there, this image would accompany the dog, reinforcing his new identity not only as a member of the family, but as a figure recognized by the entire community. This recognition process is transformative. The dog didn't change because he received applause, but the way people saw him changed forever. And as a consequence, the family's bond with him also gained another layer, because when the outside world recognizes the courage of someone you love, pride mixes with gratitude, creating an even stronger connection. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what is revealed here is a powerful truth. External validation not only confirms what we already know, but amplifies the emotional impact. When others recognize the greatness of a gesture, we are forced to confront the real dimension of what happened. This revelation leads us to understand that invisible ties, when they become visible to everyone's eyes, carry even more strength. The father, still holding the children's hands firmly, looked at the group of neighbors and, in an embarrassed voice, said, "If it were not for him, we would be telling a very different story now." These words were met with respectful silence, followed by a chorus of agreement. The scene was almost solemn. There was no need for long speeches. Reality itself already spoke for itself. A dog had saved lives, and everyone there was a witness to this feat. This collective reaction, marked by emotion, admiration, and recognition, created a unique environment. It wasn't just the family that felt transformed, but the whole community. From then on, every time that dog crossed the street, it wouldn't just be another animal passing by. He would be the hero who had prevented a tragedy. He would be remembered, respected, and admired by all. That kind of narrative doesn't fade with time. On the contrary, it gains strength. Stories like this circulate, cross borders, inspire others, because true heroism does not need a stage, but when it happens in front of witnesses, it multiplies in echoes that reach distant places. He said, "That makes sense to me." When the silence was filled by the words of the neighbors, when everyone's gaze converged on the dog who was still panting, something deeper began to form in the air. It was not just the immediate recognition that he had averted a tragedy, but the realization that there was a much bigger symbol there than a knee-jerk reaction. What was revealed before everyone's eyes was proof that animals carry within them a silent courage, a hidden truth that we are often slow to recognize. Dogs not only love, they protect with courage and instinct when we least expect it. This phrase, which echoed in the family's mind, was not just a beautiful thought, but a visceral revelation, because at that moment they had seen, lived, and felt on their skin what it meant to trust unconditionally in a being who, without words, had become the guardian of their lives. It was not about legends, nor about distant stories told in books or news. It was something real, something that had happened in front of everyone, recorded in every detail. The sound of tires, the desperate jump, the brake pulled, the car stopped by a wire, and at the center of it, a dog that proved that love and protection can walk together in its purest form. The greatness of this gesture brings up an inevitable reflection. How often do we underestimate the animals that live next to us? How many times have we reduced them to simple routine companions, forgetting that in their silences they carry perceptions and decisions capable of changing entire destinies? The family, as they embraced their dog in that instant, realized that he was not just an emotional link, but an active force, someone who was willing to act when the unexpected arose. And that changes everything. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because to reflect on animal heroism is to reflect also on what it means to be a hero. We live in a world where the word heroism is associated with grandiose feats, epic battles, or superhuman achievements. But the hidden truth this scene reveals is that heroism may be right beside us, hidden in the gaze of a dog who observes every detail, who perceives risks before we do, and who decides to act when no one else can. This kind of revelation forces us to re-evaluate our own mindset, our own choices. After all, how many times do we ignore signals, fail to act, while beings that we judge irrational are able to respond accurately and courageously? This contrast between human rationality and animal instinct is fascinating because it reveals that there is no single path to protection and love. We calculate, we think, we hesitate. They feel, perceive, and decide in fractions of a second. And perhaps this is precisely what we lack in many moments, the ability to rely on immediate perception, to act without waiting for all conditions to be perfect. The dog did not wait for the car to gain enough speed to cause panic. He noticed the beginning of the risk and intervened. This is heroism at its cruelest and truest essence. And here's an essential point. Animal heroism is not driven by the pursuit of recognition, nor by the promise of rewards. It is born of the invisible bond, of the silent love, of the instinct shaped by coexistence. And it is precisely this purity that makes it so transformative. When an animal acts in defense of the family, it is not thinking about how it will be remembered, but only about protecting. And this truth reveals something about ourselves. We often complicate courage, when in essence it comes down to a simple gesture of presence and decision. The family, living this experience, not only celebrated the relief of being safe, but began to carry a new lens to see life. The dog has become a symbol not only of protection, but also of teaching, because unintentionally, he showed that courage is not the absence of fear, it is the decision to act in spite of it. This lesson went through the walls of that house and reached anyone who would listen to the story. Behind the scenes, the impact would not only be emotional, but also mentality and transformation. They would never again look at everyday life with the same indifference. And here comes an even deeper revelation. When we talk about animal heroism, we are not just talking about an isolated gesture, but about the invisible connection that binds us to them. This bond is formed by trust, by coexistence, by mutual love. It is in the details of everyday life that this bridge is built, and it is precisely this bridge that in extreme moments allows an animal to decide to act to protect. The dog did not act by chance. He acted because he felt that family was part of him, because he was willing to put his own safety on the back burner on behalf of the lives of those he loved. This reflection leads us to an inevitable question. If a dog is capable of such surrender, what are we humans willing to do for those we love? That's the beauty and at the same time the challenge of stories like this. They force us to confront the truth that we often get lost in distractions, in delayed decisions, in hesitations, while life demands presence, action, and immediate courage. Animal heroism, therefore, is also a mirror that invites us to rethink our own journey. In the days that followed, the family realized that the narrative about that episode went far beyond the street where they lived. People who heard the story, who witnessed it, or who learned about it from neighbors, began to look at the dog with reverence. But more importantly, they began to reflect on their own bonds with their animals, on the hidden truth that we often do not see. They are not only by our side to receive affection, but to offer protection, instinct, and in decisive moments, courage. And maybe that's what makes animal heroism so special. It is not born from the search for recognition, nor from a desire to be remembered. It is born of the purity of the bond, of unconditional surrender, of love that asks nothing in return. It's that simplicity that makes it so great, so transformative, because when we witness something like this, we can no longer live the same way. We are led to see the world with more gratitude, more attention, and more responsibility. This family, in embracing their dog and acknowledging his bravery, was not just celebrating a saved day. I was recognizing that heroes are not just those who wear capes or carry medals. Heroes can also have 4 paws, watchful eyes, and a beating heart for the sake of those they love. This awareness not only excites but also inspires. It inspires us to take better care, to be more present, to value the signs that we often ignore. Now, I want to go even deeper into this matter because this reflection does not end here. Animal heroism also forces us to see behind our own emotional scenes. It invites us to recognize that animals often express what we do not have the courage to demonstrate: absolute loyalty, unconditional love, willingness to face danger, without asking for anything in return. This revelation has a direct impact on how we deal with our own human relationships. Because if a dog is able to act in this way, what prevents us as rational beings from offering the same type of delivery to the people who are part of our life? This kind of questioning is powerful because it takes us out of the comfort of indifference. It pushes us inside ourselves to revisit our choices, our priorities, our decisions. It forces us to reflect on where we have placed our attention. The dog showed in that moment that full presence is everything. And perhaps this is the greatest lesson of all: to live attentive, because life does not warn you when it will require courage. He said, "Oh, that makes sense to me." Conversations began to spread quickly. What initially seemed only a story lived by a family and its neighbors soon took on greater contours. It was as if that act, so brief and at the same time so powerful, asked to be understood in depth. And it was at this point that animal behavior experts and veterinarians were called upon to weigh in, not just to explain, but to give scientific voice to something everyone had intuitively felt: the awesomeness of the dog's action. One of the most respected veterinarians in the region was categorical in stating that episodes like this are extremely rare. He explained that although dogs have protective instincts, these instincts do not always manifest themselves at such critical moments and in such a precise way. What happened there was not just a random reflex, but a direct response to a perception of risk, which required decision in fractions of a second. He said, "Most dogs would react to noise, perhaps barking or running, but to intervene in the way this dog intervened is beyond the ordinary reaction. It's like there's a perfect alignment between instinct, timing, and courage." This analysis brought a new layer of impact to the scene. Until then, what was seen was emotion, gratitude, and relief. But with the words of the expert, the perception expanded. It was not just luck, it was a rare combination of circumstances and emotional connection between the dog and his family. This hidden truth, which many do not see in everyday life, has gained light. The dog did not just get lucky, he acted accurately, and this has been validated by those who deeply understand animal behavior. Another expert, this time on canine behavior, brought even more revelations. He pointed out that the level of attention that dogs devote to humans is so intense that, often, they perceive signals that we ourselves ignore. According to him, there are studies that prove that dogs can detect subtle changes in facial expression, tone of voice, and even the rhythm of their owner's breathing. This level of perception creates an almost telepathic connection, which in risky situations can translate into protective actions like this. This statement reinforced the feeling that it was not just about instinct, but about bonding. This point is fundamental because it reveals something greater. The daily construction of the relationship with the animal is what shapes its reactions in the decisive moments. A dog that lives ignored, neglected, would hardly have the same willingness to take risks for those who do not consider it part of the family. A beloved dog, integrated into the routine, respected and valued, creates a sense of belonging so deep that its own survival is mixed with that of its owners. That was the case. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject because understanding animal heroism through the lens of science leads us to reflect on our own journey. Experts confirm that the action was rare, almost extraordinary, but at the same time they show us that the extraordinary is born from the ordinary, from the day-to-day of coexistence, from the seemingly simple routine, from the small gestures that build trust. This revelation has a direct impact on our mentality because it reminds us of something essential. What we feed in the routine is what flourishes in the extreme moments. This perspective makes room for an inevitable comparison with our own human lives. How often do we wait for great opportunities to show courage, forgetting that it is the small daily decisions that prepare us for the critical moments? The dog did not plan his heroic act. He was only ready because his bond, his attention, and his surrender were already consolidated. This is a powerful mirror for us. There is no point in waiting for the big moment if we neglect the backstage of our journey. The strengthening of the authority of experts also generated another effect. People began to realize that this was not just an exciting story, but a case that deserved to be remembered, studied, and even shared as an example of a transformation of mentality. After all, if science confirms that it was rare, then there is something even more precious about the experience. It cannot be trivialized. It cannot be forgotten. It's a living reminder of the impact animals can have on our lives, far beyond what we usually imagine. And there is a curious detail that one of the experts made sure to highlight. He said the dog's behavior showed a level of decision-making that could be compared in emotional terms to what we call intuition in humans. That comparison was revealing. Often we distrust intuition, preferring to stifle the inner voice that warns us, while animals fully trust their instincts. They don't rationalize, they don't doubt. And perhaps it is precisely this confidence that makes his gestures so decisive. This revelation generates an inevitable reflection. How many times do we fail to act out of excessive analysis while we could avoid problems if we only listened to our instincts? The courage of the dog, recognized by experts, is also a provocation for us. It is not a question of abandoning rationality, but of balancing it with immediate perception, with that truth that manifests itself in seconds and that can save lives. Behind the scenes of this story, experts not only brought authority, but also legitimized the transformation that the family was already experiencing. They confirmed what the heart already knew. The dog was not just a companion, he was a hero. This external validation reinforced the importance of the gesture and gave even more strength to the narrative that was beginning to spread. Now, it wasn't just an emotional family saying their dog had saved them. It was respected voices, scholars and professionals confirming that it was real, rare, and deeply significant. And it's interesting to note how validation of authority generates collective impact. When we hear something only in the field of emotion, we let ourselves be touched, but we can still question. When science confirms, doubt dissolves and history gains a new dimension. This was exactly the effect of the experts' analyses. They turned an exciting scene into an indisputable truth, and this strengthened not only the memory of the episode, but also the message it carries. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because reflecting on authority and recognition brings us to a crucial point. How many times do we need someone from the outside to confirm what we already feel inwardly? The family knew their dog was a hero. The neighbors also saw and recognized, but when an expert spoke, the narrative became official, unquestioned. This pattern is repeated in many areas of our life. Do we always need external validation? Or do we have the courage to trust what we already know in our hearts? This question echoes and challenges us, and it is here that the story of the dog again transcends the animal field and invades the human field. It shows us that the impact of an action is not only in the gesture itself, but in the way we interpret and value that gesture. The expert can confirm, but those who lived through the scene had already felt the truth. This contrast is powerful because it reveals to us a hidden truth. We don't have to always wait for the approval of others to recognize the value of what we already know to be great. At the end of the day, reinforcing authority doesn't diminish emotion, but it broadens the reach of the message. It transforms an intimate experience into a collective symbol. The dog of that family ceased to be just the dog that saved its owners, and began to be seen as a living example of instinct, courage, and love. And that shift in scale is what makes this story so transformative. He said, "I'm on this journey too." When the analysis of the experts began to circulate and the repercussions spread beyond the neighborhood, something extraordinary took shape. It was no longer just the story of a dog that reacted in a moment of danger. It was the portrait of how instinct, courage, and love intertwine in a way capable of transforming destinies in a matter of seconds. The episode had been lived, felt, and witnessed, but now it became a reference, a living memory that carried with it a profound message. The most striking thing was to realize that, deep down, everyone already knew that there was a greater meaning there. The dog's gesture was not only physical, it was not limited to the sudden jump or the precise movement to prevent a tragedy from happening. It was above all a teaching, a reminder that the bonds we build have a direct impact on our journey, that decisions made in seconds can completely change the course of a life, and that true heroism is not on the big stage, but behind the scenes of everyday life. With each report, with each new look that turned to the dog and his family, the perception grew that that animal had become a symbol, not only symbol of protection, but also of mentality transformation, because as we reflect on his attitude, we are forced to confront our own choices, to question how often we fail to act when we should, and how often we ignore the hidden truth that is already presented before us. The four-legged hero, without ever having planned, had become a guide. And here's a powerful revelation. Courage doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is born from the bond, from daily coexistence, from the trust built little by little. This dog only acted the way he did because he felt his family was part of him, because their journey together had forged invisible but unbreakable bonds. This is what teaches us that in the end, love and instinct do not separate. They mutually strengthen each other and create the basis for gestures that seem impossible. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because this story is not limited to the episode itself. It invites us to look within and realize how our own lives are shaped by quick decisions, by moments of surrender, and by moments when we need to trust in something bigger than ourselves. The dog did not hesitate. He did not wait for the perfect condition. He just acted. And this attitude, when transposed into the human mentality, becomes a key to transformation. How often do we stop moving because we calculate too much? How many opportunities are lost because we get stuck in fear while life demands immediate courage? This contrast between human rationality and animal perception offers us a lesson that goes beyond the relationship with animals. It's about how we deal with our own choices. The impact of this reflection is so great because it forces us to take responsibility. The hero is not only the one who acts in extreme moments, but also the one who trains his mind, his attention, and his disposition every day to be ready when it is necessary. This is the true frame of heroism: invisible preparation, daily care, cultivated love. The dog who saved the family did not become a hero only in that second critic. He was already a silent hero in every gesture of loyalty, in every night vigil, in every watchful eye that went unnoticed. That moment only revealed what already existed. And this changes everything, because it makes us realize that the transformation does not happen suddenly, but is the result of what we build with constancy and truth. And this is where the inevitable, but at the same time exciting conclusion arises. This dog taught us that instinct, courage, and love can save lives in critical seconds. This sentence is not just a summary of what happened, it is an eternal reminder that the extraordinary can arise when we least expect it, and that we should never underestimate the strength that exists in true bonds. But realize that while it may seem like the closure of a story, this lesson is actually an invitation to continuity. Because what this animal showed us does not end the instant the car was stopped from moving forward. He left us a legacy, a key to seeing life with more presence, more gratitude, and more courage. And this key can transform the way we look at not only our animals, but also our own battles, decisions, and journeys. That's the power of a real narrative. It doesn't end when the episode ends. It lives on within each person who listens to it, creating waves of impact that spread beyond the initial circle. It was so with the family, it was so with the neighbors, it was so with the experts, and it will be so with everyone who comes into contact with this revelation. The dog has become more than a character of an event. It has become a symbol of transformative mindset, a silent guide that echoes in every heart, open to listen. And this is the beauty of animal heroism. It does not ask for recognition, does not demand applause. It just happens purely instinctively and truthfully. As we witness, we are invited to learn, reflect, and act differently on our own journey. Because if they're capable of such delivery, why wouldn't we be? He says, that makes sense to me. And that's it. We got here together, going through every detail of this story that left deep marks. If this content made sense to you, if at any time it brought reflection or true emotion, then it is worth following me here. Subscribe to the channel to continue receiving content that awakens that same connection, because there is always something new coming to add to your journey. And since you stayed until the end, leave there in the comments the phrase, "I'm with you until the end." It will be the way for me to know who really walked with me to this point. Oh, and of course leave your like too, not as an automatic gesture, but as a sign of this exchange that we create during the video, of this bridge of trust and reflection that we build together. And if you want to continue in that energy, there's a video here on the side that complements this subject. Click and continue with me there, because I'm sure it will further broaden the way you see all this.